So yeah, I'm going to be talking today about 5 changes that have happened in Google over the last 18 months or so, which I think for the people here in the room actually present quite big opportunities. I think generally when we tend to talk about Google, particularly in the classified sector, but in any kind of traditional media that's made the move to digital, when people talk about Google, there tends to be a kind of an intake of breath and they're the bad guys. But I think some of the changes they've made recently potentially offer some quite real opportunities. So what I'm going to do is take you through some of those changes that have happened. For those guys of you who are already doing SEO, you might be familiar with some of these. So what I hope I will then do is also give you some ideas of things you can do to respond to these changes that are quite practical and quite actionable. So just to start off to get a bit of an assessment, really, who currently in the room is already doing SEO in some shape, form, or trying to do better on Google? So yeah, as I expected, quite a large number there. And how many of you who put your hand up there are really annoyed with Google and the way they're constantly changing the rules, and what you thought was working would work really well, or what you thought the agency were doing for you do well? Yeah. And it's a common problem. So I'll take you through some of the issues here, hopefully answer a few questions, and hopefully have some time for some Q&A as well, because I know that there's potentially some questions that people will have. So first about myself. I work for a company called Site Visibility. We're based in Brighton in the UK. We are a search engine marketing company that does pay-per-click and social media as well. What makes us unique, I think, is we've got a fairly advanced approach to link building. We're not like a technical SEO firm compared to some companies. We're more about kind of how you can improve your reputation online, so Google sees you as more of a trusted resource. It tends to be the issues we're dealing with, some of the technical issues. Most people are getting very, very confident with that. Where we help people is how you can improve your reputation in the eyes of Google. Myself, I'm the creative director there. I told a few people the story already, so I apologise if I've gone round too drunk in the bars in the evening explaining to you. But my job title is creative director, which means largely I get to wear big glasses and jeans all the time and no one complains about it, and have a beard. This is quite short for me at the moment. But when I got this new job title, I was very excited. I went out to meet a few of my wife's colleagues, telling the story about, so what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a creative director. And I was then met with the kind of, you don't look like the kind of person who cuts hair. And I didn't realise, but apparently there's also a group of creative directors who are the chief hairdressers in Brighton salons. So that's not what I do. What I actually do is I'm involved in setting the strategy for our clients, but my main focus is we produce the Internet Marketing Podcast, which is the #1 English-speaking marketing podcast on iTunes. So we listen to by about 16,000 people, 17,000 people, all on that podcast. So if I do slip into a radio, hey, smash it voice, that's probably why from that experience there. But we've been very fortunate in that experience to work with some of the leading lights in internet and normal marketing. So we've worked with Seth Godin, Avinash Kushak from Google, Jakob Nielsen from a usability perspective, and some real great authors as well. Tim Ferriss from the 4-Hour Workweek as well, if people have read that as well. But that's a bit about me. So hopefully you can understand where I'm coming from. We've worked on quite a few classified websites over the years, particularly job boards. So that's kind of where my perspectives come from there. But we also work with people like Find a Property in the UK as well. And there's a big deal that hopefully is coming in for a very big generalist creative classified site very shortly. So one of the biggest changes, and one of the ones that's probably most obvious to a person using Google, is Google Instant. Now, Google Instant is a change which is rolling out at different countries at different stages for some people who are signed in, some people who aren't signed in, and it's at various stages of rollout. But what I will say today is it has rolled out on the iPhone and Android phones in the UK and the States today, where that's rolled out. And Google Instant is, rather than you having to type into the search result, search box, and hit enter, you get a search result, what Google are doing is preempting, based on what you've typed, what they anticipate you are going to be searching for. So, if I'm in the process of moving house at the moment, and I was searching for an online conveyancer. So I go to Google, I type in online conveyancer, but midway through convey, Google is showing me the results for online conveyancing. Now, for me as a search user, that doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. You know, it's like, oh, well, these are results which are answering my query. From Google's perspective, they've made the user happier because they've got the result that little bit quicker. But if you were the website that was number one for online conveyancer, but fifth or sixth for online conveyancing, that's potentially going to have quite a big impact on your search traffic. So that's one impact of this change. Second impact is if you're paying on pay-per-click adverts, you get your impression count based on your click-through rate is based on how many impressions you get and how many times people see your advert. If someone pauses on that search result for 3 seconds, that's considered an impression. So that has an impact on your click-through rate. Admittedly, that's the same for everyone else who's bidding, but it does start to mean that as this rolls out, you might see some changes in your results. An interesting thing about Instant is that as you start to type, it makes suggestions on what people... It's not showing you that... If I type the letter A in, it's not showing me the results for A. Or if I type AB, it's not showing me the results for AB. It's showing me the results for what they think I'm going to go on and type. Now, this varies from user to user and where you are in the world, but I typed in all the letters of the alphabet, and for me, these were the results that came up. So for these brands, if I type in A, and I'm looking for Amazon, but it's something that Argos sell, I've hit the A, there's already a result there, I might change my impression of result. Some of the more observant of you might realise there's actually no result there for you. And that's because YouTube not only have Y, they also have the U. Now, what's the implication for this for a classified perspective? Well, it needs to change the way you approach your keyword research. If you did your keyword research using tools like Word Tracker, like Google's AdWords tool, that was probably very good at that point in time and the best tool that you had to do that. Whereas now, because this is going to be changing the way that people search, because it's going to start to influence people to go for certain search terms over others, you need to probably revisit your keyword research. You will see shifts and changes in them. Now, the best keyword research tool now is actually the Google search box. So take what you think to be your main keywords, start typing them in, and see what the results are there. So that's my approach there. What this will benefit you for is if you can somehow get your brand name associated with a generic term, that can be very powerful as well. If you've got... this probably isn't a thing that many people can change, but if you have the type of products or the type of site that you're saying, so maybe it's like, buy a property, say that's your website URL. When someone starts typing buy a property, you're going to benefit from that. So that's Google Instant, big change there. Personalised results didn't really get the coverage I think that they should have done, really. As soon as Google Instant were announced, there were tons of blog posts, tons of people saying that's killed SEO. And it hasn't, it's just changed the approach. But personalised search potentially has a bigger impact to influence what a search engine optimization company or individual does. Because it started out, anyone who was signed in with a Gmail account, Google would look at what you've searched for previously and make assumptions about what you've searched for before. So a prime example of this is, say I type in Java, and I always click on the kind of computer-related results for Java, I'm going to get those results. If someone else is more interested in travel, and they've clicked on those types of results, they would get the travel-related results, or coffee and the like there as well. So everyone's results are personalised, whether you're signed in or not. So the results and choices that you've made on previous searches will influence your search results going forward. That's the case for all of your users as well. So what does that mean? Well, that means early visits help you later. So traditionally, over the last couple of years in most marketing disciplines online, you've been most concerned about the last visit to your site because that's where the sale happens, where the advert is submitted, where the contact to the person providing that classified advert is happening. That's still very, very important. But you might have had this concentration on just getting to that last one as soon as possible. Now what happens is if someone is searching now for they want to buy a bike, a second-hand bike now. They make that search, might not be that hugely valuable for you, it's a free listing or a low cost compared to the value. But what that means is that because they visited your site previously, then when they come to make the hire purchase item, be it a car purchase or a house, if you're a generalist in that sense, that earlier search where they've shown a preference for your website over other websites will help you. There's other impacts on that as well. So it's can you think about ways of getting people to your site when they're not even necessarily at this moment in time looking to use your website. With content like, blog posts, that might not instantly necessarily lead to an interaction now, but because they've visited your site previously, they've searched for you, they've come to the site ahead of time, it will benefit you in the future. So what this also means is, what I was getting at there is visits of one area of your site will help the others. So don't think of your verticals within your site as being too independent of each other. So if someone searches for Gumtree house, Gumtree to rent, then when they're looking for Gumtree cars for sale, it's going to benefit them there as well. So that's personalised search. It's happening for everyone. Everyone gets a slightly different version of the results based on what they've done previously. So you need to be building your brand and getting people to visit your site as often and as early as you can. There was an update called the Vince update. Now, it used to be in SEO that there were big updates all the time. You've probably heard about ones like called Florida and the like in the past. But then for a long period of time, Google were just making small tweaks that no one ever could really determine exactly what had happened to give it a name or the like. But Vince was a relatively big change that went through. And it's named after the engineer who worked on the project. Now, when it first came out, people thought of the Vince update as a big brand update because what it tended to do was help the people who had the biggest websites and punish the people who had the smaller websites. And that's it became known as the brand update initially. But actually, as the results have started to filter out and people have started to look at it more, what it actually is, it's usage data beginning to influence the search results. So it's not just how many links does your website have that determines how high you rank. It's not just how frequently and how well you've placed the keywords within your site. It's how are people interacting with your site. So if you're in third position on a search result and you get more clicks in that third position than a normal third position would, that's a signal to Google that your website probably should be higher than the algorithm necessarily suggests there. So usage data is having an influence. It's stuff like bounce rates as well. And the Vince update also has seen changes where if you would search for a particular query string, in the UK was the example, I think it was hire tennis courts was the example at the time. Now, for whatever reason, people in the UK don't tend to search for that. They search in a slightly different way. But because Australian people tend to search using that sequence, Australian results were starting to appear more frequently on the UK version of Google. Now, that's because Google is saying, okay, well, people searching for that type of term want that type of content, and overriding the fact it was from the wrong country because people who were searching hire tennis courts wanted Australian content. Now, what this means is if you can get your brand, you can get a generic search term associated with your brand name. So say someone's looking for Brighton House Rentals Friday ad, people will search for that. That will then begin to help you when people are searching for Brighton houses for sale as well. So that's about branding. And generally, what search is becoming less and less about as a technical discipline. It's more and more about traditional marketing, branding, reputation, customer satisfaction, and all that kind of thing as well. So usability is now really important from an SEO point of view. Usability in SEO, different types of people working on different types of projects, and sometimes can be antagonistic. But increasingly, me as a search marketer wants our clients to have the most usable website they possibly can, because that's going to start to help them do better in the search results. So, are you using tools like Google Website Optimizer to test two different versions of your homepage? If you're not, consider using tools like that. Are you looking at your Google Analytics reports to see which pages of your site have high bounce rates? So bounce rate is when someone visits that page and then just doesn't go to another page. If you've got a high bounce rate, there's a possibility there's something more you should be doing with that page. Or look at your pages of your site, look at the ones that have the top exit rates on Google Analytics. So which pages of your site are people leaving at? Sometimes, if that's a particular classified listing, that makes sense. They've called them up on the phone. That's a positive action. But if that's your category page or your search results page that they're exiting from before they've actually landed on a classified page, that's not so good. And that makes a lot of sense from conversion, to get more conversions, to have a better website. It makes more sense from a usability point of view. But now it impacts your search as well, those types of impacts as well. Real-time search is quite a big topic that's divided up into different areas, but the first of those, you've probably seen, if you're searching for a term that's trending, i.e. lots of people are searching for it at a particular point in time, you not only get your normal Google search results, you get these elements here, which is interesting because it's indented, but you've also got a scroll bar on that side there. Now what's happening there is on terms where Google believe something topical, something interesting, something's happening right that moment, they will put in this extra box in the search results that are showing instantly updated content there. It tends to be most frequently Twitter results, but it's not only Twitter results in there. It could be newspaper websites that have a timestamp. It could be any kind of content that Google can associate is happening that moment in time. Now, these scroll, they update, but it's a lot easier if a term is trending to get in this search box, in this trending topic, than it would have been to get there on that term previously. So if I am, this P stock gain here, who's tweeted about the Axis Bank here, because they were one of the people trending when I put together the report, that tweet took 2 seconds and potentially is getting traffic there. Compared that, potentially, if you were trying to rank for those terms on another topic. So you need to be thinking about what people are searching for at that particular moment in time. And if that is applicable to your business in some way, shape or form, because I know a lot of you have communities behind your websites and there's topical news happening in that community, you should be using tools like Twitter, like your blog, like any content that you've got that's time-stamped on your site to get in these real-time results, because it's easier than it would be to get there by the normal forms. Be thinking about that type of topic there as well. This was sort of touched on yesterday by the people talking about using Twitter accounts to get content indexed quicker. And I'd read that using Twitter as a sitemap blog post on SEO Moz. And I really recommend people go and read that, because there's the main way you use Twitter as a social media tool, which is to build interaction, to encourage response, and generally do all the, the fluffy social media side of things. But you can use it for a very different technical point of view. If you've got lots of content on your site and it's not all getting indexed as much or as quickly as you would like it to, Twitter can potentially be a way of doing that. Now, this website is for LFGSS, which is a forum for people who ride fixed gear and single-speed bikes in London. Very, very niche, but it's got thousands of members. And what they do is they've got a classified area of their site where it's just a forum and people can submit bike items that they've got for sale. Now, what they do is they automatically, using RSS to tweet, they automatically publish every post that they do to Twitter. Now, if I was following this account, this would be pretty boring, because, why would I want to see every time the forum's updated? I would just go. But what they found is that Google it's called the fire hose, is the terminology that people use, but Google will visit your site maybe 2 or 3 times a day, look what new content you've got, and, respond to that. But they will check Twitter for the links that are outgoing there all the time. So potentially, they will find your content quicker than they would have done previously. And if you want to be the first person indexed, so to take a step back, we work for a lot of job boards. Now, on job boards, those adverts quite frequently are syndicated very, very widely across multiple websites. Now, for those individual job postings, they can be very good for long-tail search queries. But if you're the last person to get that indexed by Google, they're going to see your competitors as the people who were the original source of that content. They will perform better. So tricks like this can potentially be quite a good way of getting your content in sooner and therefore doing better off the back of those search results there. Other aspects to real-time that I've not covered in the slides is there's, for people who are interested in SEO, there's a concept of, it's called QDF. Everyone loves the 3-letter acronym, but it's Query Deserves Freshness. Now, what that is where Google will allow a normal web page to do better in its first week or so of being online than it would do previously. We call it the Google honeymoon period. So what that means is if your website's like yourself, where you've got content going up frequently, you've got potentially members of your team who are confident producing content, that frequency of updating and new content can sometimes get you a little bit of a boost that you wouldn't otherwise have got if you were producing your content less frequently. Another one of these 5 topics is microformats and rich snippets. Now, for a long time, I thought microformats were possibly the most dull element of web development in the world. And that's where you take certain elements of your text and mark it up in certain ways. So a computer, if I write an address up, my address is, Kingslake House, Union Street, Brighton. I know which bit of that is the street name, which bit of that's the house name, which bit of that is the city. Computers and the search engines can start to ascertain that, but if you use microformats, you use a bit of markup that no normal user would see, but it's telling the search engines Brighton's the city. And the way that's being implemented is in rich snippets. So you've all probably searched for people on LinkedIn before. Normal search results, you get your title tag here, which is where all of you have been doing SEO will have been putting in your keywords. You've got your meta description there, which is kind of 150 characters or so, and then the URL. But whenever you search for someone on LinkedIn, they've got this additional line here that's in a slightly grayer colour where it's got location, country, job title, company. Now that's because LinkedIn have formatted that content on their site in such a way that Google are able to know that and then make assumptions about that. And that's happening in other ways as well. So this is on a product review-based search query. So here, this is just a blog, but because they put their review rating out of 5 in a particular piece of code that says it's out of 5, and it says the score is 4.5 out of 5, they're then getting the star result there, and who the review by and when the date was. Now, if you can imagine for those 2 particular search results, not only have you got a little bit more real estate on the screen than you previously did, so you've got 4 lines when your competitor, you've got 5 lines when your competitor's only got 4, that's quite valuable. But can you imagine on a result like that where you've got that star listing there versus other results? That's going to improve your click-through rates there as well. So how does that work from classified sites? Well, there are 2 different micro formats there. One's called hcard, which contains the address-based ones. So if you're more on the directory slant of things, you could possibly use that to say, okay, when someone searches for your results that has the plumbers in Swindon, you've marked it up in that format there as well. The review one, potentially maybe for some of you, probably less so. But there is one that's not been rolled out in rich snippets yet, but is very likely to in the future, which is known as hproduct. Now that's where you mark up your description of a product in certain ways. So you say, this is the title, this is how new it is, this is the condition it's in, this is the cost of it, this is the colour it is, and all those kind of things. Now, if you can then set up your database when people are putting in the information to that, so when that comes live on your page, it's marked up in that way. When hproduct starts appearing in this way, which seems very obvious as the next step for Google, you'll benefit from those types of ones as well. So I think that potentially is the one that's probably got the most application for people in the classified sector. So they're my 5 topics, but I wanted to how are we doing for time? Let's just see how we're doing. Yeah, okay. So I wanted to go on and cover just some other more general small topics that, when talking to the guys at the ICMA, they felt were worth touching on from an SEO perspective. So I wanted to talk about how you spot an SEO con man, because we've all worked with agencies where we thought it was all going to work amazingly and it didn't. Now, here are some of the questions I would say are worth asking if you're engaging with an SEO agency or engaging with a freelancer or bringing in an in-house team. Now, if they're only sending you ranking reports as your measure of success, that's a big oversight. Because as we've said already, every person's search result potentially is unique because it's personalised in some shape or form. So when they're sending you a report saying you're in 7th place for this keyword, 3rd place for this keyword, 4th place for that keyword, you have to take that with a huge pinch of salt. Now, they have a place, those reports. We don't stop doing them, but if that's the only report they're sending you, you're missing the bigger picture from an SEO point of view. I hate 3-letter acronyms, but I've put one in here because it would fit. But, so key performance indicators, metrics, ways of measuring the work that you're doing. If those metrics they're measuring, when they're reporting on themselves, when they're providing the board reports to you as senior members of your team, are they around performance? So is that about sign-ups for membership? Is it submissions of adverts? Is it clicking on the phone, on the email to contact the seller, is it using phone tracking? Now, a few guys have talked about phone tracking. We've used it on some of our campaigns. It's dead simple to implement. It's just a piece of JavaScript. It gets more complicated when you've got thousands of listings, but there are ways you can do it that work quite well. And if you're trying to prove to your advertisers the value they've got from phone calls that came from you as opposed to where they put you somewhere else, well worth exploring. So what I'm getting at here is if you get your SEO report from your team member or from the agency you're working with, they show you rankings and they say we've built this number of links, that's probably not what you want to be looking at. It's what impact from search has it had. And when they're reporting that as well, make sure they're separating out branded search traffic from non-branded search traffic, because the branded search traffic is coming from all your other work. If you're doing all this offline advertising and then someone types your brand name into Google, that's not the SEO that's got that visit or that conversion or that sale. That's your other campaigns. And that should be measured because it can help you assess whether that's working. But where the SEO should take credit is the generic non-branded search terms and the performance of those. As I said, we're getting more and more into kind of the PR side of things. So the ways to get links to your website, yes, you can do directory submission, yes, you can do article syndication, but actually the links that have the most value are the editorial links that really mean something. And the way that we're doing that more often now is it putting together a survey that finds out some really interesting stats about your particular audience that you can then approach local journalists with or specialist journalists in your sector about. And then when they cover that, they link back to your website saying the research was here. That's quite often stuff that your PR team might already be doing. So if there's not kind of at least a starter question, what PR efforts are you making from the people who are doing your link building? I think that they're either going off and doing it on their own, which then doesn't benefit from the work you're already doing, or they're kind of missing the trick a bit there. I also want to talk about ways of attracting links naturally and automatically. I think the difference here, but naturally is probably the better way of describing it, but automatically does as well. Now, link building, like I was talking about, those efforts where you go out and reach out to people, is time-consuming. But you want your content to be able to attract links naturally. Now, fortunately, most classified sites tend to do reasonably well on this because you've got this great content. You've got stuff that people are interested in. So you've got less of a challenge than like an e-commerce site would do. But to do that, you need to understand the linkerati. Now, there's different types of people. So you've got your audience, the people who visit you, your punters, your advertisers, all those type of people. They might not be the same people as the linkerati for you. The linkerati are the people who have the power to link. Now, they might be bloggers, they might be journalists, they might be hobbyist website owners, they might be members of the local government who maintain an area of the site that talks about local businesses. All those types of people are the linkerati. And you need to understand what makes those people tick and what they've linked to previously. You need to make all your content link-worthy. As I said, a lot of your classified ads do very, very well for that already. But one thing that I think Craigslist have done particularly well is where people are just, the random crazy adverts that are on there, people link to them. So that doesn't really help them when you get some loon who's put some personal ad up on that. That's not necessarily helping them immediately. But every single one of those links makes Craigslist a more trusted website in the eyes of Google. So it's what can you do for your websites to produce content that's really, really interesting to your audience, but also is naturally link-worthy. So yes, your core business is very link-worthy compared to a lot of businesses. If I was doing this talk in a completely different sector, they would have a lot more challenges. But I still think there's things classified businesses can do to make their sites more link-worthy. And make it easily shareable. That might be simple things like having an embed code. So on every classified listing, if you're up against the Facebook guys, maybe you can have an embed code that says, here's how to embed this on Facebook. I imagine a lot of you might be doing that already anyway. But anything that makes it easier for someone to drop that code into their page, the better it is. And you've got to bear in mind as well that a lot of people who are running blogs and websites aren't that technically savvy. So they might not instantly know how to take your page, cut the HTML out, turn that into a link, take an image from it. If you can do that in some way that makes it as easy as it is to embed a YouTube video on a site for your classified ads, you'll find you'll get a lot more sharing of the content in that way. I wanted to then finally move on to using search to help monetization, because I know that's a challenge there. Search and some of the tools that you can gain from that, particularly paid search, can help you know the value of your customers. So using the Google AdWords keyword tool, which I was dissing 20 minutes ago, you can get a good idea of what it would cost you to get that traffic to your website, even if you aren't paying for it in paid search naturally. So once you know that, you can then spot trends in that data. So are certain customers more valuable or more, your natural SEO listings are getting you traffic that would cost you a lot more. Now, if you know that value, you know that cost per acquisition to get people to your website, you can then make much better judgments on your marketing spend. I.e., too many people, and us within the search industry have got to hold our hands up, have taken advantage of people who have taken fees for them, and there's not been the positive ROI on that. If you can work out what the cost alternative would be to get that visitor, you can do quite well. And ultimately, we're all in the arbitrage business now. So you are, in some way, shape, or form, paying to get a customer to your website. Now, that might be paid search. It might be the fact that you're distributing all these offline copies. It might be the fact that you're doing bus advertising. There's 101 different ways you're probably getting people to your website. Branding might be one of them as well. But essentially, there's still a value to that, and you've got to compare the cost of that. And are you spending more getting those people to your website than ultimately you're making from them in terms of the investment? So I think the way search is shaping up is more and more people will be looking at that. How much did it cost us to get that person? How much did we make from that person? How much was the lifetime value of that person? So looking at it in a bit longer term and making assessments around it there. So yeah, that's the kind of end of my talk there. I hope those 5 big themes are ones that people who are doing a lot of SEO can identify with, can see some of the benefits there as well. And I hope some of those bits I've tacked on the end there as well might be useful for people as well. My final one is, as I say, we run this podcast. We have some amazing people on there. In fact, there's a few people who I've met here this week who I'm going to try and get on to do interviews in the future as well, who are experts in their various areas. But it's available at the internetmarketingpodcast.org, or if you use iTunes, if you just search for marketing, it's there. And we do a weekly schedule covering all kinds of different topics that might be useful to people.
Thank you, Kelvin. I think we do have some time for questions. Any questions?
So is this on? The early visits help you later. Does that apply to visits that you may have gained from AdWords campaigns?
There's still some debate as to whether that's the case. The safest one I can assume is if someone has searched for Friday ad bikes and then clicks on you and then later comes back and searches for houses for sale in Brighton, that's going to help you. AdWords, my gut feel is that the teams work so separately that I don't think that type of collaboration would be there. And actually, from Google's point of view, like we were talking to a few guys earlier about the possibility of if you turn your AdWords off, does that make your rankings go up or down? If Google were evil, it would make them go down. I don't think that's the case, because I think the teams work so separately. And fundamentally, Google's strength is the natural search results, so they can't compromise those too much. My impression at the moment is, and my understanding is, it's only the natural search results influencing personalised natural results. But there is all kinds of interesting stuff you can do in paid search, whereby you can do remarketing. So I went to the ING website, they're a mortgage company in the UK, and for the next 90 days, I had ING adverts on every single website I visited because that cookie had triggered a connection to me there. So there's personalised in natural search, which is what I was talking about there, but there's all kinds of ways it applies in paid search as well that are worth exploring for people.
You mentioned putting up all your ads on Twitter to get them indexed faster within Google.
Yeah.
Isn't that considered as being spam or abusing the social media?
Yeah, I mean, I think the case study that was used earlier in the week was each particular sub-vertical had its own account, and within that potentially there was natural content as well. So what I wouldn't suggest is if you're a website that has 10,000 adverts going up a day, you set up a Twitter account that sends up all those 10,000 adverts. What I would say is I would look at your different individual sub-areas of the site and say which ones of these aren't getting as well indexed as I would like them to. And then say, okay, well, what's causing that? I'd have a look at some of the on-site issues. Is there not enough links to that page within your site? Are you kind of shoving it off in a corner and not really paying attention to it. But if you've got all those things right, you've got an XML sitemap there and it's still not getting indexed as quickly as possible, I would then maybe work out some way that you can kind of filter them in there as well. But if you've got a good Twitter account that you're identifying the best adverts that are there, that potentially is quite useful. That Fixed Gear, I do follow them because I know that I can see there, oh, there's a Pinarello for sale. I really want a Pinarello. I'll go have a look at that website. But you've got to be aware that, if you're doing hundreds of these a day, there's ramifications of that. So it's not a solution for everyone, but have a look at that. The guys, it's on SEO Moz. Twitter is a sitemap. It's the post. Their data made it look very compelling. I've done it on small scale, kind of more hand options. So as well, I really want to get this page indexed. I'll tweet it. I've not done it on a huge scale to be really, really confident in it. But sometimes with SEO, it's about seeing what you can get away with. So I wouldn't do it with your main company Twitter account. Maybe set up a small trial one, see what happens. Maybe put in some other websites as well that mix it up so it's not just your website, and see what happens, really. You kind of sometimes, it might get that account banned from Twitter, so you wouldn't want to do that with your main company one by any stretch of the imagination. But sometimes you've got to see what the boundaries are of what the benefit versus the cost is on those ones.
Any other questions?
So thank you for your nice and interesting presentation, Kelvin. You were telling about the content that's very important for a site, and even more important are the links to this content.
Yes.
But can you share some ideas for a classified site, how we can improve this content, how we can improve the number of links to this content?
Well, first one is the data that you guys have got. Some of the stuff we're doing with Find a Property is they know, yes, there's the classic, they know about house prices up and down and they know about it from that point of view. This other project that's hopefully coming off is a lot around student pricing. So we're going to go for them, okay, well, can we look at which areas of the country are the most expensive to live as a student based on the data that they've got? They know that shared properties in this one. So that data, if you can get that, and that's interesting, you can either present that in a widget or a tool. That's a great way to start. So then people can embed that and say, okay, this new website, if I want to buy a house in BN3, it's going to cost me X amount. That's one way of doing it, the widget. But don't just build it and ignore it. That's what happens with too many widgets. You need a marketing plan to outreach to that. But one thing that's really, really hot at the moment and might not be for the long period of time is infographics. Are people kind of familiar with infographics at all? Where basically it's like, if you imagine you get like a newspaper or a magazine and you have a diagram that demonstrates some data in an interesting way. Wired do them really well, and a lot of the broadsheet newspapers do them really well in the UK. Have those as like an image which you can embed in a page which show you, okay, what is the most popular cat breed, or, there's all kinds of ramifications, and it's going to be interesting to that particular audience. I mean, there's an approach we use that's an acronym, but it's called the theme, we call it. So we start off by, the T is for tribes, inspired by Seth Godin, or ripped off, depends on what your perspective is. But that is, the audience of your site can be subdivided into particular relatively small niches of people who have a similar approach. So you need to understand who they are. We then look at the H, which is for hook. So what about your site is particularly compelling to that tribe? So that's like a USP, but it's a USP to a particular audience. Some people then struggle at that point, but I think most of you will probably do quite well from the impression I've got of all your websites. Then it's the E, so it's the engaging content, and that can be social media products, it can be articles, it can be blog posts, it can be white papers, it can be printable guides. For example, maybe you could collaborate with like the equivalent to the AA or the RAC in the UK, which is kind of like a motoring organisation, to produce the, buyacar.com guide to buying a second-hand car. And you then go out to all the websites that are talking about cars, all the websites that are talking about second-hand purchasing, and approach them about those kind of things. So, yeah, and then following through on the theme, just so I don't drop off midway through, that M is marketing. So you need a marketing plan for every piece of engaging content that you produce. And then E is evaluation. So you've got to have a measurement on the end to see how you're doing on all of it. So that might be how many people did we approach, how many people responded, what links did we get from that, what impact did that have on our search rankings and our search metrics that actually are business metrics.